1. Now, a budget response by Malcom Bruce MP, the Liberal Democrats Treasury spokesman.
Good evening. This budget matters more than most, as it's this government's last. It must be judged on whether it will provide the foundations for long-term economic strength. Yet the truth is, this was a budget of smoke and mirrors, a conjurer's budget, full of deception and sleight of hand. Listening to Ken Clarke on Tuesday, you would have thought the government had hit the economic jackpot. Of course, after a long recession, the British economy is finally recovering, and we welcome that. But an economic miracle it certainly isn't. Let us look at the central issues of this budget. Under John Major, the British economy has had one of its worst periods in recorded history, and financial management of the economy, far from being prudent, would have left a Latin American finance minister blushing. The Tories used to talk about sound money. Sound money. Just look at the national debt, the debts which the government gets into on your behalf. It took all John Major's predecessors as Prime Minister 300 years to run up a national debt of £160 billion. It took John Major just 5 years to more than double it. To pay back all that extra debt, the John Major debt, will cost you, every taxpayer, around £7,100 in extra tax bills over the years ahead. That's the real Tory tax bombshell. And on inflation, today this country has one of the highest rates in the European Union. Yet the government claims to have beaten inflation. But if the government has been so successful in getting inflation down, surely Britain's long-term interest rates would be as low as those in the rest of Europe, helping businesses and every mortgage payer. Well, are British interest rates lower than in the rest of Europe? Nope. We're almost 2% higher than in Germany and France. But what about other countries? Ireland, perhaps? Nope, not Ireland. Surely Portugal, then? No. Nor Spain, nor even Italy. The only European Union country with higher long-term interest rates than the UK is Greece. Higher interest rates, higher inflation, higher taxes, higher debt. Some miracle. No wonder people in Britain are worried about the future. It doesn't have to be that way. A Liberal Democrat budget would have tackled the real challenges that face Britain, sustaining recovery by cutting government debt and keeping interest rates down, investing in education to improve the skills of Britain's greatest asset, its people, and taking hundreds of thousands of people out of tax to help them into jobs and to tackle poverty. Those should have been the priorities of this budget. But what did we get instead? An unfair budget that widened the gap between rich and poor. Then the talk of tax cuts. In 1992, days before the last general election, Norman Lamont, the then Chancellor, told us, "We will not have to increase taxes. I cannot see any circumstances in which that will be necessary." That was followed by the biggest tax rise in our peacetime history, around £1,000 extra tax per year per family. And this budget added to that tax burden. While the Chancellor was shouting about income tax cuts on Tuesday, he was clawing revenue back through extra taxes on petrol and tobacco, on insurance, on flights, and on higher council taxes. After taking all these tax changes into account, every taxpayer would be left paying an extra £41 a year more tax. So when the Tories talk of tax cuts, don't watch their lips, watch your pockets. You may wonder how the government can cut income tax and still claim that they're going to spend more on education. The answer is they can't. The Chancellor knows this. He also knows that these days almost all local councils are controlled by the Liberal Democrats or Labour. So the reality is that this budget is not about shifting more money into schools, but just about shifting the blame for tax rises onto local councils. Because the truth is that local authorities are being starved of cash. The extra money for education, which Ken Clarke made so much of in his budget, actually doesn't exist at all. the government is just telling local councils to find the money themselves. It's like telling an unemployed person that they are free to take a holiday in the Bahamas. Fine, but where's the money coming from? Most comes from central government, who expect councils to provide more and more services with less and less funding. Do ministers really want councils to slash vital services like police, community care or home helps to pay for education? Councils should always seek value for money, but their budgets are being raided to pay for an income tax cut which the government can't afford. Ken Clarke's stranglehold on council funding means deep cuts in services and steep rises in council tax. Yet look at what is actually happening in our schools. Class sizes rising inexorably. Today, 1 in 3 of our primary school children is educated in a class containing 31 or more pupils. That's a national scandal. Liberal Democrats put education first, not because we want high taxes, but because we want higher standards. We need a generation of young people who are literate, numerate, computer-skilled and adaptable. And we need men and women who can develop new skills throughout their working lives. Liberal Democrats wanted a budget for education this year, and we would have invested an extra £2 billion per year in our schools, paid for by 1 pence extra on the basic rate of tax. That's why we will vote against the penny off the basic rate in this budget. Don Foster, the Liberal Democrat education spokesman, has identified 3 key priorities for the extra money. Nursery education for all 3- and 4-year-olds whose parents want it. Cutting class sizes, money for books and equipment, and repairing school buildings. Because investing in education and skills would help to build a recovery which would last. How else can we ensure lasting recovery? Well, Liberal Democrats would make it difficult for all politicians to meddle with the economy for political purposes by introducing a new United Kingdom Reserve Bank to set interest rates. Because markets would then know that short-term monetary policy was free from meddling by panicky ministers in advance of party conferences or elections, long-term interest rates would fall. That would cut the cost of government debt and reduce mortgages, all helping to bring down inflation. And we would keep politicians honest on tax by issuing an annual tax contract to tell you what is changing on tax and where your money is being spent. You know, the other parties are trying to tell you that they can defy gravity, or like King Canute's advisors, the incoming tide. The wise king had his throne placed on the shore to prove that he couldn't, and neither can the Tories or Labour. You cannot simultaneously cut taxes, spend more, and borrow less. Anyone who believes that and votes for it is doomed to disappointment. We must not delay investing in education any longer, and we've got to be prepared to pay for it. As Paddy Ashdown said recently, quite simply, Britain can no longer afford to neglect its education system. If you think decent education is expensive, try ignorance. The budget on Tuesday was a last tired attempt by the Tories to convince the country that they're worth another 5 years. But where on earth was the vision? The Tories' record on debt, tax, and underfunding education has failed us all. If Labour can only echo that, they will fail us too. An extra penny on income tax would cost the average adult less than a third of what most people spend on the national lottery, just 67 pence a week. Isn't investment in education, in our future, worth that much? Good night.
That was a budget response by Malcom Bruce MP, the Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesman. It'll be shown again on BBC Two at 10:30.